Well, welcome to Health and Wellbeing. Greg Richard here, joined by Peter Mullen. Peter, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Greg.
Very good. Now, today we're talking about chronic fatigue.
Yeah, most people have heard of chronic fatigue, but what causes it is still quite a mystery.
Yep.
But there's actually many different ways that you can end up with chronic fatigue syndrome. So I thought we'd touch on some of those because it is a really big problem for a lot of people. And come up with some natural solutions as well, or natural help anyway.
What is chronic health? That's the first thing we've got to get the
chronic fatigue is it's more, for years it's been, maybe even 20 years ago, if you went to the doctor and said that you had or suspected you had chronic fatigue,
Yep.
they would have told you literally there's no such thing.
Yep, have a Panadol and go home.
Absolutely. So it's sort of something that's it's a diagnosis by exclusion in lots of cases. So it's like a lot of things in health, like it's once you've ruled out everything else, then often if you're suffering extreme fatigue, greater than 6 months, it'll often be called chronic fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yep.
Because it's not just, there's lots of ways I believe that you can end up with chronic fatigue, and then there's a wide range of symptoms that you can get with chronic fatigue as well. So that's why it's a bit tricky. And with something like chronic fatigue, if anyone's out there and struggling, I'd really suggest that they go and see someone like a qualified naturopath or
Yep.
someone that's got a bit of an understanding of how this all sort of comes about. So it's a complicated syndrome, as I said, characterised by extreme tiredness for at least 6 months. And it's not... I've had patients come into work and they'll tell me that they think they've got chronic fatigue, but they're actually still functioning. They're
Yep.
still going to work. They're still, doing things of a weekend. So true chronic fatigue, the worst cases of chronic fatigue syndrome I've seen are where people are really debilitated. They're in bed.
Yep.
Basically, they if they walk out to the letterbox, they struggle. They have to stop 3 times and, stop 3 times on the way back. So it's extreme fatigue. I see a lot of patients that I think do suffer with fatigue, but that diagnosis of chronic fatigue I really reserve for really, severely unwell.
So that could be more of a mental thing than physical as well.
Oh, look, it's not. There's lots of ways. Like fatigue is such a broad area,
Yep.
On a scale, and nearly 90% of patients that I would see, it'd be very rare that I would see someone that would say that their energy's awesome. But what I'm saying with chronic fatigue, it's not just being tired, it's actually being unable for your cells, for your mitochondria, for your body to actually produce energy efficiently, something severely interfering with that energy production. So it doesn't matter with chronic fatigue how much sleep you have, or how much stress there is. Once you're down that path, like it's a long road to recovery.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So there's fatigue.
Yep.
And then chronic fatigue syndrome is a whole worse area altogether again.
Okay, so that's chronic fatigue is both physically and mentally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And there's lots of ways. No one's exactly clear what causes it. And as I said, it's really difficult to diagnose with laboratory tests.
So it's not quite sure how you can get it, or?
Well, there's some theories.
Yep.
And I've got some theories, which I
like a good theory.
Would you like me to go through my theories? So, as I said, chronic fatigue is classified as a syndrome because there are many causes and the symptoms are so diverse. So one of the common things for a lot of people with chronic fatigue, so there's, all roads lead to chronic fatigue, or, different roads lead to chronic fatigue.
Yep.
The first one is viral infections.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of people that end up with a diagnosis of chronic fatigue have often had glandular fever or the Epstein-Barr virus in their system.
Yep.
And I believe that these viruses are a bit like, when someone has a cold sore virus, and everybody knows if you've got a cold sore virus, you've got that virus in your body for the rest of your life.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so if you get cold sores, you'll always get cold sores. If you've never had cold sores, if you don't have the virus, you'll never get cold sores. So that cold sore virus is in your body for life. I suspect that viruses like Epstein-Barr, CMV, cytomegalovirus, other sort of, we call them occult or stealth infections, I believe these viruses are still active in people's system as well. So
I know there's Lyme disease on the sheet as well.
Yeah, that's very, it's a big topic.
Yep.
It's very debatable. The standard medical approach in Australia is that there's no Lyme's disease in Australia. But I know people that have been tested for Lyme's disease in Australia, been diagnosed with it from labs overseas, and have never travelled overseas.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a funny area because medically they're emphatic that there's no Lyme's disease, but Lyme's disease can be definitely a big cause for some people with chronic fatigue.
Okay.
So infections, we call them stealth pathogens, and they're infections that people might not even know that they have. And often, you can have, say, glandular fever when you're doing your HSC in your 20s. You can have a stressful period. You can sort of get to the point where you're getting sick more frequently, and then all of a sudden there's a major trauma or stress, and then that can be enough then to trigger off something like chronic fatigue. But it can follow on from a post-viral infection.
Right, and
I've got a big list there.
It's a very big list.
So have we got time for this section, or do you want me to?
We go through it. Yeah.
Yep. All right. The next one is so it can be the post-viral infection or chronic infection or stealth infection route.
Yep.
The next route I often find is through what we were talking about before, mental and emotional well-being, particularly to do with the adrenals. And actually, we've got a really good talk on tonight.
Oh, okay,
that was a good segue.
A very good segue.
We've got a good talk on tonight, a free talk for anyone interested in stress and adrenal fatigue, because adrenal fatigue is definitely one of the contributing factors for a lot of people with chronic fatigue.
Yep. Where's that talk at again, just quickly?
Charlestown, the Multi-Purpose Centre. So if people want more details about that talk tonight, if they can either call our office or get onto our website or Facebook page, and the details will be there.
Very good.
But it's interesting with adrenal fatigue, there's a new concept around that it's not so much the adrenals get exhausted, but it's actually more dysregulation in the brain. Mm-hmm. And I'm coming back to that with chronic fatigue in a minute. So adrenal fatigue, stress burnout, where the whole nervous system sort of crashes and burns, is definitely a contributing factor to chronic fatigue. So you've got the underlying infections or viral load. You've got the nervous system burnout, stress and trauma affecting the whole, what's called the HPA axis. There's often, with chronic fatigue people, there's often gut-related issues as well. A lot of chronic fatigue people have leaky gut, which we've talked before about on this show, where the gut wall becomes inflamed and very small fragments or toxins from the gut actually cross into the bloodstream and trigger an immune response. Those immune complexes can be found everywhere, from the brain to the joints. So leaky gut, severe leaky gut can mimic or, almost be a mimic of chronic fatigue for some people. And then the fourth area, and this is a relatively newish sort of area, newish sort of understanding, and it's toxicity. So toxicity, everyone talks about toxicity like we all talk about stress. And toxicity is all around us. It's in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, unfortunately. A really massive area I'm finding with people that have real severe chronic fatigue type symptoms is toxin overload, but particularly to do with mold. Okay. So, and Newcastle's had such a massive history now, the last, people that will say that, I've never been well since the floods in, such and such. So a certain percentage of the population don't have the genes to be able to produce the antibodies to detox when they come in contact with mold and mold toxins. Oh, okay. So someone like you or I might be able to breathe those toxins in. Our immune system produces antibodies and they're dealt with. People with this mold sensitivity, or it's called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, actually aren't able to produce the antibodies. And you can get tested to see whether you're genetically susceptible. They aren't able to produce the antibodies. So these toxins play a major role in actually causing inflammation in different parts of the brain, which affects things like your hypothalamus and your pituitary, and you'll end up with chronic fatigue type symptoms from that as well. So, oftentimes, Lyme's disease has been seen as, if it's nothing else, maybe it's Lyme's, but I'm sort of thinking more and more that mold is more and more of an issue for a lot of us. And, particularly all our kids that are developing all these sensitivities. So they're my four areas. But so it's infection, the adrenals, the gut, and toxins, particularly looking at mold. And probably the major thing that happens with chronic fatigue is that the mitochondria, the energy-producing factories inside your muscle cells, don't efficiently produce energy. Oh, right. So it's quite literally, it's like having a car where, a 6-cylinder car that's like literally running off one cylinder. And it doesn't matter what you do until you find out what's causing that. It's very difficult to treat. But, we'll go into some of the ways that we can do that in the next section. And today we are talking about chronic fatigue, and we've mentioned a bit earlier how you can get it, but the symptoms
How do you know if you've got chronic fatigue?
Well, as I said, the major symptom, with chronic fatigue, or as we're calling it now, chronic fatigue syndrome, is fatigue. But as I mentioned before, it's severe debilitating fatigue. Where quite literally you can't get out of bed for days. Yeah. Other symptoms, though, often, in addition to the extreme fatigue, are joint muscle pain, poor concentration. You said you struggle a bit with that.
Sorry, what was your name again?
Memory loss as well. So you actually, do you want me to pass you my pen, and as we go through these, you can just tick off what one. Enlarged lymph nodes, and a lot of times when people have had glandular fever, their glands will just sort of stay permanently up after.
Yep.
So enlarged lymph nodes can be a sign that there are underlying infections that your immune system's working all the time to keep on top of. Headaches. Chills or night sweats. Night sweats are really common. As I said before, because there's often a gut root for how we end up with chronic fatigue. Digestive disorders like irritable bowel type stuff, food intolerances, bowel variability, etc. Irritability, mood swings.
Okay.
And
mood swings, really?
Did you tick that?
I was nearly going to tick mood swings.
That was Riley, though, I think.
Oh, okay.
Mood swings, yeah. We'll put that down. We'll put R down next to that one. Anxiety and depression. And again, one of the things that we find with when people have been under severe stress for a long period of time, obviously their brain chemistry is going to shift, or they're going to end up with more anxiety, or so that can be as a result of chronic fatigue as well as being a contributing factor.
Yep. It's sort of interesting as well with anxiety and depression. When you mentioned earlier at the top, when people come in for chronic fatigue, doctors go, "Oh no, dismissed it." It's kind of a bit the same with depression and anxiety. Like a few years ago, that would have been, "Oh, you're fine, go home."
Yeah, well, look, when I started, and tonight at our talk, we're actually talking a lot about how I think anxiety and depression often gets triggered.
Yep.
And it's a lot to do with this HPA dysfunction, hypothalamus pituitary, get out of balance first, and then they send abnormal messages to the rest of the body. So, 20 years ago when I first started in practice, or 25 years ago rather, if you went to the doctor and told them you were stressed, you know what they would have said? Exactly what you said. They said there's no such thing. It's they called it, a doctor told one of my patients once, that's just a new age concept. This is 25 years ago. There's no such thing as stress, and basically people were either prescribed, mental health was such that they were either prescribed heavy duty drugs or told to go home. And one of my patients told me she's in her 60s now. So when she was a young girl or a young woman just starting her teaching career, she went to her doctor at the time then, and it would have been maybe 30 years ago, and she told him what was going on, and he said, "Well, have you ever thought of taking up smoking?" Because smoking was seen as a relaxing thing to do. Yeah, crazy, isn't it?
That's crazy. And then 30 years from now, that's the last thing they'd probably tell you
absolutely,
to do.
Absolutely. So you're right. So with chronic fatigue and anxiety and depression, they've had their times of where, it's all in your head. And or the other side of things is a lot of times when people go and see their doctor with a wide range of these symptoms, the doctor might say, "Look, we've done all the tests. We can't find anything wrong with you. I think you're depressed. Here, take an antidepressant."
Yep.
But the reality is that the antidepressant's not necessarily what that person needed. Yeah. And that's the other side of, with anxiety and depression being more common these days and talked about so much more, it's being treated a lot more with antidepressants rather than always stopping and thinking, well, hang on, is this depression? Is this full-on medical depression? Yeah. Or is this as a result of a heap of things going on in your life and your diet's, I was going to swear then, and your diet's poor, and you've got lots of stress going on, etc., etc. So that's where naturopaths come in. Like we treat that wide area where people are really unwell, where they're getting tested and they're being told there's nothing wrong, before the point of actually being diagnosed with something. So if you're diagnosed with something, doctors can be fantastic, not being negative, but current medical model is all about what medication you need to treat what condition or what symptom. But if you're in that area where you've not been diagnosed or no one can tell you what's going wrong, that's the time to see a naturopath. And that's a massive area. So anyway, that was slipped off sideways there, but you're right.
I put you off track then for a bit.
No, that was a really good question actually, and so that's the same with chronic fatigue. A lot of people, even today, going and seeing GPs that aren't aware of what's involved with chronic fatigue, may well just come up with a diagnosis. Look, I just think you're depressed.
Yeah.
Here, go away, take this antidepressant, and come back and see me if that doesn't help.
Okay. Well, we might talk a bit
So we need
more.
to look further, turn those stones over, and have a good look underneath.
And just not give a pill to people.
Absolutely, not as the first port of call. Absolutely.
I've got John from Mayfield, and he seems to have struggling with some shingles.
Hello, John.
Hello, Peter. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, mate. I think I can hear a train in the background.
I think I'm just going to Beaumont Street, mate. You probably might have.
Okay. How can I help you?
Mate, I'm suffering with the residue of the shingles. The rash has dried up, but I've got severe abdominal pain.
Okay, and it's surface pain or more and deeper?
Surface pain, mate, I think.
Yeah, okay. Look, with the shingles, as you know, like it's a virus in your system, and then there's often a trigger. I always call shingles the last straw condition. You know, people say, what else can possibly go wrong now? And they end up with shingles.
Yeah, that's right.
Once it's sort of come out, once the rashes come out, or the blisters have come out, once the blisters have dried up, it's often nerve pain that you struggle with after that.
That's right.
So three things I'd really recommend. Have you ever taken St. John's wort before?
No, mate.
Now, with St. John's wort, you can't take it if you're on an antidepressant or any sort of anti-anxiety medication.
Right.
But St. John's wort is particularly good for any last trail and remnants of the virus. But it's also what I would recommend for nerve pain as well.
Right.
Now, once the blisters have healed, so but you need to get a really good quality St. John's wort and take it internally. Once the blisters have healed, get some St. John's wort oil and apply that topically.
Righto.
Now, the two other things I'd recommend would be vitamin C and zinc, and also another herb that I love called echinacea.
Okay.
And if, all of this was preceded by a stressful event and you feel you do need something more from a nervous system or a stress point of view, I'd recommend going and seeing a naturopath.
Okay, mate. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, John.
Cheers, thanks, John. It is Health and Wellbeing on 2 UR FM. We are talking about chronic fatigue today, and we've got Jeff from Salamander Bay, and he's got a comment about it.
Hi, Jeff.
How you going, mate?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah, I've had chronic fatigue for a few years. I guess different stages in my life, but what it is, and I was diagnosed by the hematologist that I have hemochromatosis, which is an iron overload disease which caused all this problem.
Okay.
I don't know if you know hemochromatosis at all, but that's how I found out I had, actually, because I was tired and I could hardly do anything.
Yes.
And then I had this hemochromatosis, and you're born with it.
Yep.
And as you get older, it affects you more, and all I do is, I've got to regularly give blood.
Yes.
The only way you feel better, but it catches up with you pretty quick and you get tired again. It's pretty, so I regularly get chronic fatigue, and I've been happening for probably 15 years now. So.
Okay, and you think that yours was contributed or triggered off by the hemochromatosis?
Definitely was, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah, that's awesome. Look, it's one thing I've found with chronic fatigue is if you can find out what the cause or the original insult, injury, or trauma was or is, then it's much easier to manage. But thanks very much for your call, mate. That's a really good tip.
And that's it's the thing that a lot of people have got it and they live, but they don't know they've got it. It's an easy blood just to find out, and it's
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a bit of information there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jeff.
Thank you, mate.
Okay, bye.
Cheers, thanks, Jeff. We are talking about chronic fatigue today. Nearly out of time for another week, Peter, but just about to wrap up. And there's a few more things you want to talk about for treating chronic fatigue.
Yeah, just a couple of things. So what Jeff was talking about is a genetic condition called hemochromatosis, which is an iron storage problem. So people with hemochromatosis, they, when we're all eating meat or eating, iron-containing foods, we absorb the iron, and most of us, the body gets rid of what it's not going to use. In hemochromatosis, they don't.
Oh, okay.
So the iron levels get higher and higher and higher, can end up storing in your organs such as your liver and your kidneys, cause fatigue, etc. So as Jeff was saying, the only treatment for that, zinc can be beneficial, but the only other treatment really is bloodletting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. But again, finding the cause. So with chronic fatigue, there are lots of places you can start to just help yourself. As we said, the gut.
Yep.
And with the gut, we always talk about if you're getting gut symptoms, cut out the gluten, the dairy, and the sugar, as this definitely will reduce the burden on your gut. Taking a good probiotic, eating fermented foods, doing all the things we've talked about before to treat leaky gut or treat any underlying gut association. Viruses, herbal medicines are phenomenal. Myrrh, we've got an awesome myrrh tablet, and myrrh's great for those stealth pathogens. Even things like Lyme's disease has been shown to be quite effective.
I don't know, what is myrrh?
Myrrh's frankincense, incense, and myrrh.
Right, if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for
absolutely,
us.
Absolutely. And also herbs like licorice, echinacea. They really work well on these undercurrent of viral or infective overloads. Adrenal fatigue, always things like nutrients for energy production, which are your magnesium, your B vitamins, your zinc, your vitamin C. And they're basically, you want to support, and CoQ10, you want to support that mitochondrial energy function. And then herbs to help recover the adrenals and that HPA dysfunction, which is your licorice and your withania. So we sort of always, naturopathically, we sort of look at the nutrients as the base and the diet, and then we use herbal medicines are our pharmacokinetics or our drug component.
Okay.
That's not the right way to say it, but that's where they're really beneficial. And, just assessing that whole toxicity, seeing if someone does have a mold sensitivity or, they're having a reaction to biotoxins. So, as I said, there's lots can be done, and it's one of those things that you start just getting a bit of an improvement, and then you get a bit more of an improvement, and then you add another element in. So it can take quite a while, but there's definitely hope for people with chronic fatigue. And as I said, just got to find out what the cause might be.
Right.
Or causes.
Sorry to cut you off, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Greg.
It's been a very educational 45 minutes.
I'll see you next week.
Health and Wellbeing on 2NUR FM 103.7.